The great one, Mark Levin, on fire earlier tonight. He's been warning about the deep state and their battle against President Trump. Take a look.
The FBI sought to interfere in our election. I'm not talking about the men and women who work at the FBI. I'm talking about the top echelon. They sought to interfere with our election, and they sought to interfere in our election in worse ways than the Russians did. How is it that Barack Obama is never questioned about this? His name never comes up. Never comes up. Are you telling me that the director of the National Security Council, Susan Rice, didn't know a thing? Are you telling me that the deputy director of the National Security Council, Ben Rhodes, a well-known leaker, he didn't know a thing? Are you telling me Valerie Jarrett didn't know a thing as she sits there controlling every department and every cabinet secretary? Are you telling me that James Comey, who likes to meet with presidents and takes memos, that he didn't meet with the president or write any memos? It's nice to see now that we have committees of Congress who are concerned about this. It's nice to see now that we have radio hosts who are concerned about this. It's nice to see that we now have television hosts who are concerned about this. Where the hell were they in March? Mark, what are you talking about? Where were they in March? When I had information, pulled it together from the public accounts, and began to pull the string and to see that something didn't smell right, something didn't look right. And the media came down on me like a ton of bricks.
And Mark was on this show at that time, and Sarah Carter and John Solomon in March. They broke the story about FISA abuse and a warrant at Trump Tower. Here with reaction, the author of the bestseller, Trumped Up, How Criminalization of Political Differences Endangers Democracy, Harvard constitutional law professor Alan Dershowitz. Sir, good to see you again. I saw your comments that you fear that they're going to try and go after obstruction of justice. This was supposed to be about collusion. Explain your fear.
Well, my worry is that a constitutional crisis could be started if Mueller starts probing the president's motives as to why he exercised his constitutional authority to fire Comey, why he exercised his constitutional authority in telling Comey, if he did, to go easy on Flynn. Those are actions that are definitely provided for in Article 2 of the Constitution. And prosecutors simply do not have authority to probe the motives and try to get into the brain of the president any more than when President Bush pardoned Caspar Weinberger to prevent himself from being targeted. Nobody thought to probe his mind or the workings of his mind. And so I think one possibility is for the president to say, look, I'll answer questions about criminal conduct, alleged criminal conduct, but I won't answer questions about my motives in exercising my constitutional authority. And if you press me on that, we'll take that issue up to the United States Supreme Court. We'll get that resolved before anybody can be charged with anything relating to obstruction of justice for exercising constitutional rights.
In this environment, Professor, why would the president ever go before Comey? I'm sorry, before Mueller, knowing about Comey and Strzok and Page? And what would you do if you were his attorney?
Well, first, he really has no choice. The special counsel can subpoena him to go in front of the grand jury. He can refuse to answer specific questions based on privilege or specific areas based on his constitutional authority. But in general, every American citizen has to comply with a subpoena to go in front of the grand jury. And so he will have to probably compromise and work out a deal with time limits, with his lawyer present, and with limits on the scope of the questioning. Now, they won't agree on obstruction of justice. Mueller will insist on asking him questions, and his lawyers might very well say, no, that's out of bounds. It will create a constitutional violation of checks and balances and separation of powers for anyone to question the president's actions under Article 2 of the Constitution. As long as they were lawful actions under the Constitution, nobody has the authority to question the president's motives.
All right, so you have, I'm sure, look, you're a well-known criminal defense attorney, Harvard law professor. Have you ever heard, A, of an FBI director and an investigator writing exoneration draft after draft months before they interview the key people involved? B, when a phony dossier paid for by one candidate is used not only to lie to the American people, that's separate and apart, but then used as the basis for a FISA warrant. Isn't there a strong argument here this never should have happened?
Yes, and I think every civil libertarian should be concerned about the abuses of the FBI. Look, I've been writing about the FBI since J. Edgar Hoover was the director, and civil libertarians, whether they are conservatives or liberals, ought to be concerned about the potential abuses of intelligence, which is why I called for an independent commission, a bipartisan commission, not a political inquiry, to inquire into whether there was influence in the election by Russia, influence in the election by the FBI or anyone else, because you're not going to get it when you have partisan disputes by members of Congress or a special counsel whose only proper job is to investigate.
But have you ever seen it this
crime.
bad? I mean, to use one candidate, a phony dossier they paid for, to be the premise of a FISA warrant against an opposition candidate, and then an incoming president, and then the FBI director is literally exonerating. So this, and I believe there were crimes committed, you know, mishandling of classified information, destruction of classified information. You know, I don't know many people that acid wash their hard drives and beat the crap out of their mobile devices, Professor. So I think there was a strong case there, but they exonerated her before they investigated. Whether you, it doesn't matter.
As you know, I know
where you stand. But my question here is, there has to be a basis here that this was formulated on false information from the get-go.
Look, there are two issues. I agree with you completely that if the FISA warrant was based on a questionable and possibly false series of documents, that under Supreme Court doctrine can be challenged. Yeah. The issue about whether or not you exonerate before an investigation depends on whether there is a crime charged. If there's no crime, of course you exonerate. But if you're looking for evidence, then you have to have a full investigation.
All right. Thank you, Professor.